We're nearly now a week out from the Biden-Xi meeting on the sidelines of the APEC summit, which really seemed to steal the show from the summit as a whole. There were really, three key meetings that took place: the meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping, the broader APEC summit, and the gala that Xi Jinping attended with American business executives. Miles, I want to get your thoughts on all three of these, but first, now that the dust has settled, what is your overall assessment of how this Biden-Xi meeting played out? You were fairly guarded against the optimism that the Biden administration and many commentators seem to display. Did anything meaningful come out of this?
I don't think there is an exuberant display of optimism before, during, or after the conference. Obviously, the objective is that the Biden administration did meet with the head of the Chinese government in San Francisco, and they talked about the issues. But those issues have been talked about over and over the course of the Biden administration. So there's nothing new. What's new is that the Biden administration believes that it has somewhat stabilized the relationship. That's true. But whatever was agreed on during the San Francisco summit was mostly symbolic. China continues to do whatever it has been doing as the world's most destabilizing actor. So it does not really alleviate in a major way the concern of the Biden administration, because China continued to act pretty provocatively. While Xi Jinping was still on his flight back to China, the Chinese Navy, for example, shot high-energy sonar pulses at Australian Navy divers from the Australian destroyer in international water near Japan, causing minor injuries. This is highly provocative and dangerous. So much for the military-to-military hotline. So I do not really hold much hope for the longevity of this whatever warm feeling President Biden and Xi Jinping might have developed in San Francisco, because China continues to interfere with the regional security. And China also continued to interfere with Taiwan's upcoming election in a very bold ways, as you can see in the last week or so. So, but most importantly, whatever was agreed on at the summit between President Biden and Xi Jinping remains unenforceable, or at least not guaranteed. For example, one of the issues discussed and agreed on was for more Americans to go to China to study. Over the weekend, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson announced that China was ready to invite 50,000 young Americans to China for exchange and study in the next 5 years. This all sounds very good, but this is quite disingenuous, because the Chinese government has made China a dangerous place for Americans to stay, study, conduct educational and scholarly exchange. The State Department, as we speak today, still has a standing travel warning urging Americans not to go to China because they may be subject to arbitrary detention or arrest, and basically it's not a safe place to visit. Which is why there are, right now, as we speak, more than 300,000 Chinese students and scholars in the United States to study and do some research, but no more than 350 Americans, I repeat, no more than 350 Americans are currently in China studying. So that's a pretty telling difference there. The Chinese Communist Party has turned the huge country into a high-tech surveillance state ruled by the CCP's total control of information and personal freedom. So therefore, China's invitation to 50,000 Americans to study in China means very little, because nobody really wants to accept the invitation and go. So which brings me to another aspect of the comment about this. We talk about competition with China only in terms of economy, technology, and military, but we rarely talk about the fundamental political and systemic nature of the Chinese regime. If we keep doing that, we're not going to prevail, because the CCP is not just a competitor, it's the enemy of freedom and democracy. We really can't compete with the enemy and win over California One, San Francisco sourdough bread, accompanied by corporate sycophants and powerful China lobby in the upper crust of American society. My overall comment was that, well, I'm glad that it took place, the summit between Biden and Xi, but I'm not going to be very sanguine about the longevity of that friendship or whatever developed between Biden and Xi.
I want to get your thoughts on the APEC summit itself. I know there was some tension among members regarding joint statements, especially with regards to whether an economic summit like this should be even issuing statements at all regarding controversial geopolitical events such as the war between Israel and Hamas and Ukraine. Are there any takeaways we should have from this that people may have missed with the spotlight on Biden and Xi?
The APEC conference, there is a lack of the overall emphasis on the joint interest. There is a very little show of jointness at the conclusion of the APEC, but did provide opportunity for a lot of regional leaders to talk and to communicate. For example, the president of South Korea had a very robust discussion with the Japanese prime minister, and the Filipino president was also very active. They all talk about one thing, China. So this is a very, very interesting thing. Without this disruption of the Biden-Xi summit, I think the APEC theme should be more emphasized.
Turning to the gala that Xi Jinping attended with American executives, this was a matter of some controversy as executives paid a hefty $40,000 ticket to attend and could be seen at times giving a standing ovation to Xi Jinping. Yet the prevailing takeaway seems to be that despite Xi's attempts to frame the PRC as business-friendly and to cool tensions, these efforts fell flat. What do you make of this meeting, and what do you think it portends, if anything, for the U.S.-China economic relationship going forward?
The schmaltz, the sycophancy poured out by these American business tycoons for a communist dictator, enemy of freedom, was stifling. It's a disgrace. I mean, these guys gave Xi Jinping a standing ovation even before he spoke a word. Now, if you look at those guys who were in attendance, most of those who showed up, the head of BlackRock, Blackstone, Apple, Tesla, Bridgewater, Nike, Pfizer, etc., most of them have already had heavy investments in China. And their main purpose was to succumb to the supreme leader of China for assurance and protection. They were afraid they will be squeezed out like many other companies too. But don't be fooled by this hoopla at the $40,000 seat, fancy dinner for Xi Jinping. I think in general, American business circle have overall soured on China. If you pay attention to this list of the attendees, it's very interesting. You can see conspicuously absent at the dinner for Xi Jinping were most of the CEOs of Silicon Valley major American tech companies. People who did not show up at the dinner were the CEOs of Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, NVIDIA, Intel, and AMD. Those companies are either banned to operate in China, such as Google and Facebook, or they are main targets of China's relentless economic and technological theft and espionage. They know the risks are very high doing business in China, or they may just think showing up to hobnob with the enemy of freedom may tarnish their image. I mean, I was reading this Financial Times report about this dinner, and that report cited many sources who were actually at the dinner, but very few of them want to be openly identified. That shows that their appearance at this dinner could be a liability for their company, would tarnish their reputation. But most importantly, as your question suggested, Xi Jinping has completely failed to convince anyone to continue investing in China. In fact, some of the most vocally pro-CCP hedge fund titans are quite disingenuous. The best example is the Blackstone's Steven Schwarzman. This is a guy who is really, really close to the CCP leadership, particularly Xi Jinping himself. On one hand, he led the crowd to basically give Xi Jinping a standing ovation in San Francisco. But at the exact moment when Xi Jinping was in San Francisco, Mr. Schwarzman was voting with his feet. He was executing a massive sell-off of his gigantic holdings in China, including high-end commercial properties in 11 major Chinese cities, totaling 2.2 million square meters and worth total $10 billion. So Blackstone is not alone, and big hedge funds such as Appaloosa, Taper, Soros Fund, and Tiger Global, they have all dumped their holdings in major Chinese e-commerce giants such as Alibaba and JD.com. So by as much as 50 to 70%. I mean, so if you look at the major American financial index on China, the MSCI China Index Fund, for example, on the day of the Biden-Xi Jinping meeting, November 15th, that index dropped by 8%. And Wall Street Journal reported that in the first 3 quarters of this year alone, more than $100 billion worth of American investment have left China. Not only foreign firms are fleeing China, the Chinese are doing the same thing too. On the day of the Biden-Xi Jinping summit, November 15th, China's social media behemoth, WeChat, and its word search index reported a 4,400% increase of the search word migration because people want to get out of China, mostly those people who have money. During Xi's visit to San Francisco, Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, sold 10 million shares of his holding in Alibaba Group Holding, worth a whopping $871 million. So this is the massive exodus of foreign investment and capital flight from China because Xi Jinping has made China very hostile and uninvestable to international capital because he was conducting communist economic policies that are contradictory to free market, property protection, and intellectual property rights, even individual safety. So basically, that's my overall assessment of Xi Jinping's counteroffensive to American corporate world. And I think that's a major failure, in my view, because no matter how glib Xi Jinping might be, he cannot beat the market.
Charm offensive is a great word, and it seems to me that China and the CCP's leaders have been playing a game for the last several decades, which is to, on one hand, have external rhetoric towards the world and the U.S. in particular that suggests a friendly China, but internally have policies that contradict that. And that game might be coming to a close as people are sort of waking up to the very real and visceral consequences of dealing with China economically or otherwise. On that note, do you think Xi Jinping has woken up at all to the fact that these rhetorical ploys are falling on deaf ears? Were there any actual meaningful assurances, specific policy changes that he made to the business community that might help them feel better about dealing with China?
No, he didn't address any of the policy issues at all. China has completely cut off its economic and financial data sharing with the international business community. China has really sort of tried to strike hard on the VPNs, the free communication channel between American companies inside China and outside the world. China also has raided and chased out virtually all the due diligence firms in China. Those American companies were finding out the economic reality of China, and they are the ones that basically try to check the accuracy of the Chinese statistical data. And most of the Chinese statistical data were fake and unrealistic. So this is basically an environment that is very hostile and very unhealthy, and there's risk. Businessmen, their bottom line is real, and they don't want to gamble their money in China, no matter how soothing Xi Jinping's words might be, because he failed to address all these policy issues. Unless he changed the system, unless he sort of capitulated to the forces of the market, there's no way that international capital will go back to China. The best thing to describe this right now is decoupling. Decoupling has never been government policy, no matter how wishful Secretary Yellen might be. Decoupling is happening, regardless of what U.S. government might think, because corporate America, they're very pragmatic, so they care about their bottom line.
For our last topic, this past weekend, Foreign Affairs republished a 1972 Barbara Tuchman essay entitled "If Mao Had Come to Washington," which takes up the hypothetical question of how U.S.-China relations may have played out had the United States offered some recognition and support to the CCP as early as 1945, pointing to Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai's secret proposal to open up relations with the U.S. government, even going so far as to offer to travel to Washington for a meeting. Miles, I just want to offer you the floor to talk a bit about this essay, your reaction to the argument, and why you think Foreign Affairs chose to republish it at this time.
I thought the dinosaurs are already extinct. Apparently, I was wrong, because there are dinosaurs running Foreign Affairs, apparently. This article is a farce. This is a product of the era where America was involved in the quagmire in Vietnam. So people were pretty much pretty much the anti-Vietnam war. So Barbara Tuchman was used to write this essay to echo that kind of national sentiment. basically saying that United States was supporting the wrong guy in the foreign country. It's just like in Vietnam. So she went back to talk about this American experience in China during World War II. And so the premise was that United States failed to recognize the representative of the future of China. That was the Chinese Communist Party. Instead, we're supporting the wrong guy, which is the Nationalist Party led by Chiang Kai-shek. This is really, really sort of a very, very bizarre. I mean, in 1972, there might be some currency. But now, 50-something years later, they're still publishing this kind of garbage. It's really, really astonishing because history has proven if in 1949, 1940s, the Chinese Communist Party did not succeed in China, there will be a much brighter future in China. So Communist Party was never the future of China. So for Foreign Affairs to reprint this, if they want to resuscitate that really terrible assessment, I mean, it's just really, really just beyond belief they could do this. So this is the premise. The premise was totally wrong. She said that in the article that this is basically sort of a hypothetical what-if kind of thing. What if in 1945 when Mao Zedong said he wanted to meet FDR and therefore U.S.-China relationship would have been totally different. This complete misunderstanding of the Chinese Communist Party's nature. I read a book about all this period, and I knew that appeal to Roosevelt in requesting a meeting was not even drafted by Mao, by a bunch of OSS agents and former State Department officials on loan to the U.S. Army. They wrote this in order to sabotage American policy of supporting the nationalist government. It's really not historically accurate. Implicit in this article is this teleology. That is, the purpose of her writing this in early 1972 was to pave a way for President Nixon to go to China, to engage the Chinese Communist Party, to open up China. And as a matter of fact, President Nixon did an incredible job going to China and trying to bring China into the international community. That's the whole idea of Richard Nixon's visit, because he wanted to engage Communist China in order to induce changes. That's what he said. But again, the entire Nixon approachment with China has also proven to be a flop. Just before his passing away in 1997, President Richard Nixon talked about his visit to China in 1972. He said, I might have created a Frankenstein. This is basically an admission of the guy who went to China. So for Foreign Affairs to resuscitate this age-old sort of nonsense is just totally beyond belief. I think also, I'm a historian. I mentioned that I worked on some of the similar issues. At the time, most of the original archives, were closed. They were open only to Barbara Tuchman to peruse. In the late 1990s, the archives were reopened. I personally went to check about Barbara Tuchman's sources of all her articles and her books. Everything she cited was accurate. It was there. For that, I give her credit. But what's really astonishing is not what she cited. What's really astonishing is that what she didn't cite, he didn't use. If you have a sort of holistic, balanced approach to archival evidence, her entire thesis would have been wrong. Either her writing about Stilwell or about this phony issue of Mao requesting meeting FDR. In terms of conceptually and also methodologically, this writing is completely off the mark. This article has been totally discredited. I mean, so I don't know why they're still coming to at the moment where U.S.-China bilateral relations have been completely overhauled in the last 6-7 years.
And it seemed to me that implicit in this was a notion which you have tried very hard to disabuse Americans of, which is that the Chinese Communist Party's conduct is contingent on how we treat them. And a sort of overarching thesis in the piece was that things may have played out different had we, extended a hand earlier on. And that, in fact, the animosity towards the U.S. was from the Chinese Communist Party was a result of us failing to do so, completely sort of missing the ideological inherent animosities that system would have to ours. And so I guess, from my perspective, it is troubling seeing the republishing of this, that these ideas still seem to be rather pervasive among the American foreign policy elite.
Oh, you're right. I will even go further. I think, implicit in this approach to the Chinese Communist Party is this rather unhealthy, let me put it that way, or even insidious notion that the Chinese people, they're just Chinese people. They are nationalists by nature. They are never capable intellectually and culturally accept, let alone implement, a Marxist-Leninist ideology that coming from the West. And this is basically the major reason why our policy has failed, because we completely underestimated the degree to which the Chinese Communist Party is a pure Marxist-Leninist political apparatus. And year after year, we look at China as if they were just the Chinese peasant in straw hats. This is a very unhealthy mentality in American intelligentsia and a major portion of our foreign policy establishment. The primary promoters of those unhealthy ideas were mostly those missionary kids who were born in China and raised by Chinese amas and held by the Chinese coolies. And they have this very, very bizarre mentality about the Chinese people and Chinese culture. And that influence has gradually diminished over the years. And right now, we have to start anew. I mean, I think right now, the American foreign policy were helped by an entirely new brand of China scholars, China experts, who have mastered modern political science theories, who have living experience in China under the communist system. So this is a very different ballgame. And for foreign affairs to print this kind of old garbage, I don't understand why.